I have something of a confession to make as we start off this morning. I love this material and this topic. Okay. Maybe there's someone in this class or in this auditorium who has had a role in teaching others, and you watch the lights go off in their eyes. You know, they understand it, they get it, and all of a sudden they are enthused. I actually teach two classes here at Freed-Hardeman that are tied to the material that we're discussing this morning, an undergraduate class and a graduate one. And you think for a moment about persons who get really enthused when the light bulbs go off and they understand when it's, Spanish or math or ag studies. How much more significant when it's tied to the fact that they're gaining understanding, connecting the dots on gospel teaching and spiritual matters. We're talking now about business that can have a reach all the way into eternity. So by the time we get done with this, if this really stokes your interest this morning, you find yourself saying, wow, I would love to learn more about this and how to do this, good news for you. I know a guy, and I know a couple of classes that we would love to have you take part in, because we're equipping ourselves to talk meaningfully with students, others who've invested themselves, they're interested. We're going to talk and unlock the pages of the gospel, our benefit, their benefit, the kingdom's benefit as well. Two anecdotes. The congregation was really struggling because they had diminished attendance in their Sunday morning adult Bible class. At the head of the class was a person, a very, very fine man who had only been a Christian for about a year. Now, sitting on the front row were two persons who had extensive education and experience, and they really coached this new teacher from the front pew. As they're going through the Bible text, they would point out things that he might want to highlight for the benefit of the class. They would speak them up to him, and then he would be the voice to the class. Someone in the class might have a question, and they would ask, and this man at the head, the teacher, would look down at the two in the front row, and they would help feed him an answer, because he's a new Christian. He doesn't know what the answers might be. Simply put, he was in over his head at the head of a Bible class. Now you know maybe why there weren't that many people who were coming. There wasn't a lot of buzz about attending that particular class. And so as a solution, the leadership of that congregation decided that they would take steps to boost Bible class attendance and participation. What they did was they inverted the Bible class hour with the worship service period. So people would come in and have worship service, and then once that concluded, the members would go off to their respective classes. I suppose that among all of these really well-intentioned persons, the idea was that if we have them here already, they're sort of, well, I'll just say they're captives, right? The expectation is they'll stay and that'll boost our numbers. Well, in point of fact, what happened was the individuals at the end of worship service, they gathered their things together and in a very cheery voice told everyone around them, thanks so much, we'll see you next time, and they made their way out the door. The issue is that the solution was not to reorder the activities of the day. What was not happening was they weren't providing the needs for a really high-quality, transformative learning experience, the very thing that should draw someone who's interested in the Lord and spiritual things. It just wasn't present. Anecdote number 2. The preacher was asked if he would be willing to teach a class for young adults, college-ish age, and have a couple of months to cover the material that he wanted. Well, this particular individual had a lot of study and a lot of preaching and ministry work experience behind him, and he readily agreed to do so. Once he started, now the initial number of students in the class was, 6, 7, something like that. After about 6 or 7 weeks, the number had grown by more than 500%. The visitors brought visitors. And there's a very clear reason why. There was nothing sophisticated, there was no smoke and mirrors, nothing like that. You just had an individual who knew his material and how to explain it to others. He treated others, the students in the class, as if they mattered. He was kindly, he was respectful, and every student that came into that class and then left at the end had the impression, this fellow cares about me and my spiritual life, my journey, my relationship with the Lord. And they came back and they brought others, and the class exploded in size. What we're talking about this morning are the characteristics or the elements that are included in a really effective teaching environment that characterized that second illustration where things were so successful and were absent in the first one where they were really struggling. At the same time, I'm so optimistic about this. One of the reasons why I like teaching this material is because there's nothing magical, which also means that there's nothing that's impossible. By putting these things into practice, we can have meaningful learning sessions. It requires effort. It requires conscientious application of certain ideas and certain goals, but it is absolutely attainable. And I want us to highlight these strategies that help make that possible. Before we do that, there are a couple of things that we might attend to, such as why this study, on top of the illustrations I just gave. Well, first of all, for those of you who are gospel preachers, you might do a little mental inventory and ask yourself, how many minutes each week do you spend in the pulpit preaching your sermons? Maybe a typical number would be, if you preach Sunday morning and Sunday night, 25 to 30 minutes per, then you're looking at about 50 to 60 minutes in a week in the pulpit. If you think about Sunday morning Bible class, typically 40 or 45 minutes, maybe you teach that. You might also teach a Wednesday night class or ladies' Bible class or men's Bible class. To say nothing of special events like Vacation Bible School or church camp or Horizons, for example. It is very possible, maybe even likely, you spend more time at the head of a Bible class than you do in the pulpit delivering a sermon. So we have classes like Prep and Del or expository preaching, fantastic classes, really developing the skills for the person who's going to stand, compose a lesson, a sermon, and deliver it effectively. But maybe we don't always give as much attention to how to conduct a good Bible class, how to handle the dynamics of a room where there's dialogue taking place, and maybe some of the persons are non-Christians, or we're not entirely certain what's going to happen in this live event. So we want to make sure that we address those and give some training in that area as well. What about for our members? You know, our members, they volunteer their time typically. Most of them are not going to be professional educators, which means that a lot of this enterprise is new to them. Maybe they only know to do what they have seen when they've sat in the chairs as a student. So we want to empower them, to give them confidence on how to manage a class and have an effective learning environment. To say nothing of thinking about the future teachers. We want to have others that are prepared to step in. Time passes, figures move from the scene and come onto the scene. What is it that they're going to know or need to know in order to be effective? So we're talking about the perpetuation of training and teaching. There's a passage in the Bible that speaks about that very issue, and it's 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 2, Paul's valedictory letter. He writes to Timothy and he says, the things that you've heard of me among many witnesses, you commit those same things to faithful people who will be able to teach others also. That's a picture of perpetuation. Teaching, sharing the gospel, allowing lives to be transformed by the power of God's word, effectively communicated, even while it's being lived out in the lives of these people. By the way, in that verse, did you notice there are 4 levels? There's Paul, who's helped educate Timothy, who is educating faithful figures around him, who will be able to educate others as well. Now, you and I both know James chapter 3 and verse 1, there's a real responsibility that rests upon the shoulders of those who would teach the gospel. James says it. But we can manage that responsibility well and still achieve this teaching of the gospel that the Lord wants to happen. But there's a right way to do that to make things be effective. So what is it that takes place in a successful teaching event? Now, this is all preparatory to the strategies, but I think it gives a good foundation. First of all, of course, there is the teacher. There is the student who is there to learn. And then there is the content, in this case, the Bible, that they're going to be exposed to. all three of those have to come together. In fact, you and I as teachers and promoting good teaching, we live right there where these overlap. The teacher is interacting with the students in this setting for 50 minutes or whatever it is, and they're sharing the gospel. These come together for transformative teaching. A word about the content. The Bible is enough. The writer says, "Thy word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my way, to guide me safely home." God's word is the message that we need. We put ourselves under the authority of the New Testament and the Bible as a whole. The Bible is enough. It's what God's given. But in a second sense, having the Bible is not enough. Imagine a home where the Bible sits on the shelf. It is covered with dust because it never comes off the shelf. No one opens it up and no one reads the pages. They have a Bible. It's not enough. Imagine someone who does open the Bible and they can understand a few things, but otherwise it's a largely perplexing body of material. I don't know what to do with this. The Bible shows us a couple of episodes at least that are like that. In the Old Testament, back in Nehemiah chapter 8, we have Ezra, this ready scribe, who with his colleagues gathers all the people of God before the water gate. They have a small stand upon which he steps up. Suddenly everyone can see him, probably hear him better. His colleagues are interspersed among the crowds that are listening that morning. And if we have a summary statement, it's perhaps in verse number 8 when it says that they read the law of the Lord. They gave the sense, and they caused people to understand. Imagine in the crowd, somebody hears what Ezra is reading, and they ask among themselves, what is that? What does that mean? And someone that is spread within the crowd can step over. What that means is this. They have set up a wonderful arrangement where effective teaching can take place. And we know for a fact that it did. If you start reading in verse number 9 following, you see the reaction of the people, and that's a testament itself to the effectiveness of teaching. All of a sudden, the people are weeping. They're grieving, so much so that Ezra and his colleagues have to say, none today. Today's a day of celebration. I ask, why would they be grieving? Maybe a variety of reasons, but surely it has something to do with evaluating their lives and maybe the actions of their ancestors in relation to the teachings that God has given and what his expectations are. We've missed it, and we're sorry. Those are persons with whom we can work. To the New Testament. Acts chapter 8, verse 26. We have Philip the evangelist who is directed to go interact with this Ethiopian fellow as he's in his chariot making his way home. The Bible says that as Philip came up to this man, he heard him reading from what we know to be Isaiah chapter 53. He asked the man, do you understand what you're reading? Now that's a great question. And in verse number 30, the man said, how can I unless someone explain it to me? That's this kind of image. A person who understands sharing with someone who is looking to understand the content that God has given for our guidance and for our benefit. That's exactly what we're talking about. Another way to look at this, with a slightly additional component, pedagogy. It's the process and science associated with education and teaching. So, looked at in this fashion, yes, we have the people, the teacher and the student. Yes, we have the content. But the new element on this screen is organization. The idea that there is a plan to make the content comprehensible. Kind of like the plan of Nehemiah chapter 8, right? Putting persons amidst the learners, helping them to have the light bulbs go off and understand. That's what we want to do, and sometimes what is missing the most, not the people, we have them, we have the Bible, we want to make sure we understand it, communicate it clearly. It's the organization part that sometimes is lacking. Some of the strategies are going to talk about each of these different components in one form or another. The 6 different strategies. The first 2 are going to address the issue concerning the people. And so we begin by talking about great teachers. If I were to go through the class or the auditorium here and I were to give each of you a piece of paper and a pencil, I would ask you, write down the most memorable qualities of the best teachers you've ever had. Go all the way back to elementary school, all the way up to whenever you stopped. What are the best qualities of your best teachers? We collect all of those, bring them together, we collate them, look at them together. And I'm probably not going to recognize, well, I'll recognize virtually no names if somebody put a teacher's name down. But I know for a fact that we will all see some overlap in the entries that people put in those lists. So, it's not surprising that educational institutions have put a great deal of time into studying the characteristics of great teachers. Studies like that abound. But why only have those characteristics for a class in mathematics at the local junior high school or in algebra or English? Why can't we highlight those same characteristics and try to foster those within the teachers in our local congregation's Bible class structure? Here are some that we might put on the list. We want them to have credibility. They know their subject matter. But more than that, they live it. They demonstrate in life. These are also figures who can communicate clearly. They get the point across to the students in the class. They come in and they're extremely excited about the material. They've benefited from it, and they're excited about sharing it with other learners. You know, enthusiasm like that, it is infectious, and it's wonderful. They come in and they have a certain style that they would like to use. All we mean by that is it doesn't have a ho-hum feel. They pick vivid words. They maintain eye contact. They have gestures that complement the material. They might use some multimedia aspects that are appropriate for the material, but they teach with a sense of energy and new style, we might say. They're willing to take on risks a little bit with creativity. We're not saying that they're mishandling the Word of God. No, no, no. This is just about the fact that they might try an activity in class they've not tried before, a discussion group that then comes back together. Okay, fine. They're willing to engage so that things are not ho-hum or just pro forma. They value and respect the students, and the students know it, and they feel like their presence matters. And they can manage the classroom. You know, sometimes there's a person who asks questions that are really challenging, important, but challenging. How do we handle that? What about the disruptive figure? And they're not always just about, 8 years old either. We have the disruptive figures that are in their 50s, and there's a need to handle those situations. How do we do so effectively? A need to involve everyone, those who can read well and those who can't, but they still want to be a part. You see, all of these things can be addressed to help a teacher be the best version of teacher they can be, and consistent with helping people to learn. Number 2, understanding the characteristics of various learners. That's a goal. You see, there's a variety, really. Learners and needs vary. We could talk about that from an age discussion, right? It's different teaching second graders than it is teaching 12th graders than teaching retirees. There are differences that are related to their intellectual development, their emotional development, their psychological abilities and things, but they still need to be taught at a level that fits with them. We need to know what those are. We could add to that the fact that at different stages of life, people have different needs. Someone in the second grade is concerned about certain things that someone at 17, it doesn't interest them anymore. But at 17, they have other interests and temptations. And those may be radically different than someone who is rearing their own small children versus those who are in retirement age, for example. And they all have needs that ought to be addressed by thoughtful planning and execution. So as an example, what about adults? Some of the things that we know about adults is that they want to learn. Generally speaking, they are in our classes voluntarily. Okay, I know sometimes the one person nudges the spouse and says, "We are going." Okay, and they go. But for the most part, adults come because they see some value in coming. One of the other aspects about adults learners is that they connect dots well. You see, they're developed well, typically, intellectually, emotionally, psychologically. We can give them some things in discovery learning. They connect the dots well, and they have this aha moment. We may not have to convince them that this material is important the way that we might need to convince someone who's 14. Different stage of life, different perspective, different response. Did you know, though, that one of the challenges with adult learners is they're afraid, oftentimes. Adult learners don't want to be embarrassed by giving a wrong answer or appearing foolish in the eyes of the rest of the class members. That's just a general feature. Okay, there are ways to handle that. We toss out a question to the class. We would really like some feedback, engagement, and it's crickets and more crickets. But you know, there's a sister or a brother over here in this corner that we know is confident, they know the answer, they just haven't spoken up, giving others a time. We call on them and they speak. And the ice is broken. And now someone else might speak. And as long as we treat everyone with respect and dignity, we don't ever say that a wrong answer is a right answer, but we can handle things with a felicitous fashion. And suddenly people are willing to contribute and discuss. It's a bit different than children. Children, age-differentiated limitations. We teach cradle roll. That's really different than teaching 3-year-olds, which is really different than teaching 6th graders, that is really different than teaching a senior in high school. So we want to be aware of those differences and how we connect with them at a level that is appropriate for them. That's what this type of training will address. By the way, when is the right time to bring children to Bible class? And the answer is the first time that they can come after they've been discharged from the hospital when they are born. They need to come all the time. They are being habituated into an environment that is God's family. They won't know ever having not had that as a part of their memory banks and their experience. Are they going to understand everything in cradle roll class? Of course not. And we know that, and that's still okay. Are they going to grow, however, and think, this is normal, this is my family. These are the faces I know and I'm familiar with, and I can put my hands together and pray before we eat our Gerber food at the table in the high chair. Absolutely, that is something they can do and grow to appreciate. Have you ever thought of children as a computer? Okay. In your laptop, for example, you have a hard drive filled with data, and then you have a processing unit that operates on that data to give certain outcomes. When children are small, they are really good at acquiring data, remembering it. It fills their memory banks. We're filling the hard drive. Now, because they're small and young and their intellectual abilities haven't thoroughly flourished, right, arrived at full maturity, their CPU, we might say, is still growing. But you know, once they continue to grow and their ability to process and to learn and to make connections expands, they've got a hard drive full of data that they can think about and they can utilize. I remember our daughter, Catherine. I encountered her sitting at the top of the stairs one day crying. She was about 6 or 7 years old. And she was crying, sweetie, are you okay? What's wrong? She said, you know how Joseph did right and always told the truth and did what he was supposed to do even when he had been arrested and things? Yeah. She said, I told a lie. And she was broken about that. Well, here she is at an age where her development is sufficient for her to be able to use that data and evaluate her own decision-making and actions. And that would only increase as she continues to grow. So children need to be taught from the earliest of ages. I mean, isn't that what's said in 2 Timothy 3 and verse 15? From the time that you were a newborn babe, Paul says to Timothy. So we want to know about learners and their needs. The next 2 strategies that I'll mention are going to focus upon the material, the content itself. And in particular, we start by talking about the curriculum that we're going to use. I want to give a shout out to Ron Butterfield, retired professor in education here at Freed-Hardeman, missionary, gospel preacher, elder, member of the church here in Henderson. In 2006, he published a 1-page article on the marks of a good curriculum, an effective curriculum, and I still have a copy of that. I found it very simple and insightful. Choosing a good curriculum is important, or writing a good curriculum is important. For example, now this isn't an exhaustive list, but it's a very good list of elements that make for a good curriculum. It has a high view of the Bible, God's inspired word. It teaches from the Bible accurately. It doesn't make one passage say something it doesn't actually say. Good curricula also have a content structure, right? An introduction, the body of the lesson, a conclusion that has application sections with it, for example. Good curricula they provide resources for the teachers. I mean, the purpose is so that the teacher doesn't have to write the material, something that may be beyond their abilities, depending, right? So does a good curriculum provide the resources they need? It really does. As mentioned a second ago, good curricula also provide applications. This is where I think of the so what category. And I'm not saying that in a snarky fashion. What I mean is, so what is the purpose for learning this? What do I do with it? Why does it differ from the statistics on the back of a baseball card? That's data, but it's not going to change my life. So does it discuss application, the takeaways, and what I can do from this point forward that will make my life more like that of Jesus the Christ? And then the last category up here again, if it's meant to address, the entire congregation, we're using it across all of our classes, is it age differentiated in terms of the content? If not, it's really going to be difficult for the teacher to massage that material into the right form. So a good curriculum. Let's talk about when we use one that we've acquired from outside. We purchased it, someone shared it with us. Remind our teachers that using this material, it's just an aid. The curriculum is not the teacher of the class. The teacher is the teacher of the class. Let's suppose a teacher reads the lesson and is really enthused about it, but there's a particular passage that they think in the Bible better illustrates a certain point in that lesson. Use it, and don't use the one that's in the passage. Not because it's bad, but because there's a preference on the part of the teacher. An illustration, I like mine better than the one that's in there, for whatever reason. You see, the teacher is the head of that class, and this is one of the tools made available for them to draw from. So, maybe even talking with teachers about how they can do that, so that class doesn't become just reading the chapter in the curriculum book. We can do that at home. And we don't want students thinking to themselves, I could have stayed home and done the same thing. That is not an effective learning event. So use it as a tool. What if someone is creative and they want to write their material? That's a great thing. It happens frequently. What do they need to keep in mind in order to do this well? Well, first of all, I would say that all the same considerations we've just spoken of still apply. High view of Scripture and content structure and things like that. But with that is the recognition that this is a significant investment of time. Let's suppose they're writing the material for a 13-week Bible class in our congregation. They have to have a sense of what's going to be covered across that entire 3-month period, and then be able to divide it into 12 or 13 individual lessons that can stand alone effectively and yet lead right into the next ones so that there is continuity. And then inside of that, there needs to be an introduction, a body, and a conclusion with application and things like that. In other words, writing this material is a significant commitment to time and mental energy. The good side about that is that once we've done that, it gets easier to write good curricula. And it's material that we might be able to use again later down the road. It's something we might share with a friend or another teacher. It is something that might even live beyond our lifetime. So it's a goal that's worth pursuing, perhaps, just with an awareness that it's a great deal of effort to make something come to life that is good and effective. Number 4, talk about using effective lesson elements. I want to zoom out just a little bit and give something that, if you have any school teachers in the audience, you're going to see this next slide and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. A couple of quotes about the value of a lesson plan. When we say that, educators and school systems sometimes kind of shudder, right? Because the lesson plans are the things that they have that map out what they're going to teach in their classes over the course of the coming school year. They very often have to supply those to their principal or to their supervisor. It's a roadmap of what this class is expected to be and to do. It is a lot of work on the front end, especially the first time someone's constructing one. However, it also ends up being a tremendous benefit. Because as the year goes, the teacher has a pathway that they know they're going to walk with their students and the material. If they don't pay attention to it, it's a bit like ignoring a syllabus or something of that type. They go off into the weeds. They cover other things perhaps, but they don't hit the goals that were in front of them that the students need to learn in this setting. So an effective lesson plan can be very powerful. My question is this: if we have a lesson plan for the things that we teach in our public schools or similar schools, is it such a far-fetched idea to think that we might craft those for our Bible classes too? A holistic vision, what we want to cover, and how we're going to do it. We write the material to do so, or we utilize the material to do so, and when the classes end and the quarter ends, we think we hit X marks the spot. If the teacher doesn't know where the class is going, the class is not going to know where they're going, and we don't arrive at some desired endpoint. This is the kind of thinking that makes us get to the desired endpoint. Here are some of the elements that might go into a good lesson. There'll be things like storytelling, or you could just say illustrations, for example. There'll be thought-provoking questions that invite the students to ruminate a little bit, think through something. I would suggest the value of a case study. I love case studies. They are hypothetical situations, real-life things, and the class is asked to think through the possible activities of the persons in the story, and then apply biblical principles and think what would be the right thing to do based on biblical teaching. The nice thing about case studies like that is they're real life. And a person can see themselves, perhaps, and some of their similar situations in the hypothetical also. Maybe someone has a discussion group or a buzz group. There may be a lecture. By the way, lecture. I'm convinced that lectures are the easiest way to teach a class and the hardest way to effectively teach a class. A lecture's monologue. So for all of the ruminating and the thought-provoking questions, for all of the exploring the possibilities of a case study, the teacher has to do all of that monologically because there's not the dialogue that is engaging the class members, which means the teacher has to capture attention, sustain the attention and the interest, and work through the material that is planned. It's a demanding task. It can be done, but it has to be done thoughtfully and well. People use statistics, and that can be a great thing, but not too many, because numbers begin to scramble and they lose their effectiveness. Maybe there's quotations that might be cited from someone who is in favor of Christianity or provides something supporting. Maybe a quotation from someone who's a critic and they need to be answered. Whatever the case may be, these all help put meat on the bones, we might say, building up and helping with the biblical text and its teaching. So, as you read through the gospel accounts, you will see that Jesus, and the apostles too, use things like this to help the audience members learn. Think about the times that Jesus gives a parable, and the people that hear the parable, at least some of them, are so angry with him, they begin to threaten him. Now, why would they do that? It's because in the case study or illustration or parable, they see themselves in Jesus' meaning. It has an applicability that prompts some type of action. We want classes that engage these things. By the way, all of these things fit in sermons too, and they put meat on the bones for a sermon. The last two things are both having to do with the structure and organization as we think about the future and having others who will help us teach. So, provide routine teacher training inside of a congregation. Absolutely. When we think about people, we go up. Have you ever had to do this? I've actually gone up to people and say, hey, would you be willing to teach a class in our class program? And it is not uncommon for someone to step back, their eyes get wide, deer in the headlights. I couldn't do that. A couple of reasons. Number one, they've maybe never done this and they're really intimidated. They do not feel up to the task. This helps make them feel up to the task. It helps them to be ready and gives confidence. The other reaction is sometimes, I don't want to do that. I've done that before. And what they're really saying sometimes is, I don't want to say yes because I'll never get out of that class. I'll have to die to leave that class. But if we're training new teachers, that doesn't have to be the case. Now there's someone they can rotate with, or they can bring along and then hand things off for this upcoming quarter. So, strategies. I would encourage us to conduct routine training on teaching, pedagogy. Use the apprentice model, bring the new person in, let them learn alongside the experienced figure. Maybe after an appropriate period of time, they're both feeling comfortable, they switch roles. And now this person is stretching their wings, spreading a little bit, and getting increasingly comfortable, capable. And now we've got two teachers, not just one. We could have the professional educators in the congregation give tips and pointers, use them as a resource. And we can also make resources available. When we close in just a couple of minutes, I'm going to suggest two that I have found particularly helpful and that I require of the students in my classes. Another possibility, strategy number 6, I encourage you in the congregation where you worship to consider conducting a teacher training workshop. This is a big vision type of thing, and not only for our members, but maybe we invite the congregations that are around us so they benefit from it as well. You know what? 2 years down the road, maybe the other congregation will do something similar and invite us. There'll be a lot of overlap, but there'll be some unique elements as well. 2 or 3 years after that, another congregation over here is going to set up and have the same kind of thing. It is this perpetual need being met by perpetually driven efforts to train and to be effective. Here are some things that we might talk about at such an event. All right, I'm going to put this up here. I'm going to call attention to the one that's on the bottom, thinking about how it might be structured. Imagine having a lesson or two on Friday evening, followed by another 4 or 5 on Saturday, not the entire day. We're not trying to wear anyone out. But we're going to talk about things that are, number one, useful for everybody. We'll call those our plenary sessions. Everyone's going to be in hearing these things. It might be things like, what are the qualities or characteristics of the best teachers? Everybody needs to hear that. What are the qualities of an extremely good curriculum? Everybody needs to hear that. But then there might be some in a breakout session where we talk, for example, about the age-appropriate learning, different groups. So we're going to have elementary over in classroom A, and we'll have someone address what it's like to teach elementary students. We're going to have high schoolers over in classroom C, or adults in auditorium D or similar. Okay, we'll have some breakouts where people can refine and be specific. But in doing this, it empowers everyone. Whatever we come into the doors with, we supplement, we complement, we develop even further. And that's how we help people be ready to teach and preach the gospel. I promised 2 resources, and here they are. Number 1, creative Bible teaching. I put together a class like this and started teaching back in about 2003 in Austin. And the textbook that was mentioned to me that I ended up using was Creative Bible Teaching by Richards and Bredfeld. Now, this is a later edition of it, but it is still an incredibly helpful book. Why? Summarizing a few things, it talks about learners and their characteristics, as we've mentioned. It talks about levels of learning from rote memorization all the way up to really in-depth reflection and self-application. It has great sections talking about the structure of the lessons and some of those components like case studies and illustrations and statistics, for example. It also gives us strategies that can be applied to sermons. I read this, and in my mind, this book, I look and I think, that'd be a great on my sermon for this coming Sunday. Because the strategies are valuable. It's the delivery format that may be different, but this is incredibly valuable for all. My one caution, these are evangelical authors, so they have a non-biblical and unbiblical plan of salvation, activities of the Holy Spirit and the Godhead and things like that. But that's okay. We'll read and be discerning. But we're not reading this book for theological insights. No, we're reading this for methodology, for methods. How can I be an effective educator in the gospel? Second resource. This particular book, written by Charles Willis, Brother Willis, member of the church, it is called Effectively Teaching Adult Bible Class. It's smaller, you can make it through, it's not perhaps intimidating just based on size. Now, he is addressing teaching adults, not children, but so many of the general ideas are applicable regardless of the class. It is simple, it is straightforward, and the things that he talks about, we're going to feel comfortable reading and not have to spit out the bones. Maybe you make these available in the church library or to the teachers in the congregation where you worship. They're really very good books. So I say all of that, and I'll close with the words of Paul in Acts chapter 20 and verse 32. As he's talking to the elders from Ephesus, he says, I commend you to God and to the word of his grace, which is able to build you up and give you an inheritance among all those who are sanctified. We're so thankful the Lord loves us, pays attention, and blesses, that we have the chance to serve him and to love him. And it's his word that effectively works in us to transform us. What we're talking about today is making sure we provide opportunities, teaching for transformation. May the Lord bless us richly as we seek to introduce others to the gospel and help them grow in the grace and knowledge of the Lord Jesus Christ. Thank you for your attention. We are dismissed.